This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Let's talk about the investment. It's freestyled here in the Observer that it's low six figures. Do you think that's about right? That's going to be what it winds up being?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was, but it certainly wasn't, anywhere approaching seven figures. I hate to guess, because if it comes out and I'm wrong, people, oh, he's lying, but Jesus Christ, folks, it's 20 some odd years ago. I don't have the records at my fingertips. I have a pretty good freaking memory, but I can't remember specific contractual details from talent 22 years ago. But I'm guessing 250 a pop, maybe a little more, but it would have been under 500,000. And at that rate, and that's a lot of money, folks. I get it. We throw these numbers around sometimes, and it's like, hey, it was only $250,000 to show up at a pay-per-view. That's a huge amount of money. But keep in mind, pay-per-views, the profit margin on pay-per-views were really high. The cost of putting on a pay-per-view, including marketing it and promoting it, probably $600,000 all in. When you do $2, $3, $4 million on that kind of an investment, that's a really good return on your investment, and that's a very healthy margin. So there was room in there to take a $250,000 roll of the dice to see if it worked. And if it clicked, like I said, if it clicked as well as Warrior certainly believed going in it would, or Hogan believed it would have going in, or I had hoped it would have going in, if it would have clicked, we would have been off to the races. But it didn't, and we weren't. And the amount of money that we risked to try and see if there was something potential, so there was some potential there, the amount of money that we risked was minimal, and we probably earned it back, in one degree or another. So it just wasn't as big a deal as so many people made it out to be.
Excited for us to talk about him. Of course, before we get into it, we've got to briefly touch on the Renegade. I do want to save most of our Renegade conversation for another episode, but the first time we think there might be a tease is in 95. Hulk Hogan reveals that he has an ultimate surprise to be in his corner at the Uncensored pay-per-view to sort of watch his back against Big Van Vader. That would, of course, turn out to be the Renegade. Very briefly, and I know we're going to do a whole Renegade episode another time, chat me up. Did you have any discussions with the Ultimate Warrior in 1995? He doesn't return to the WWF until March of 96, so it stands to reason that there could have been at least conversations, maybe preliminary in nature, but some sort of conversation in 95. Did that happen?
Did not happen. At that time, we didn't really need anybody with that kind of profile, meaning that big of a former WWE star to try to come in. We were working with Hulk Hogan. We were working with Randy Savage. We had our own top level talent, Sting and Lex Luger and Ric Flair and so many others, that there wasn't a need for someone like Warrior in 95, even if he were available, but there was no conversations at that stage.
Let's fast forward, 1998, at the very beginning of the year. Jim Hellwig is going to be in a lawsuit with Titan Sports, aka the WWF, and they're suing each other based on who can use the term Ultimate Warrior, the phrase, the name Ultimate Warrior, and their likeness and characteristics. Ultimately, Hellwig wins the ability to use the Warrior name and all the characteristics and likenesses, but there's no discussion or decision made about the phrase the Ultimate Warrior, because by that point, it doesn't matter. Jim Hellwig has legally changed his name to Warrior, which seems crazy, but maybe it's crazy like a fox. What say you, Eric?
Well, it's committed. I'll say that. Crazy, maybe. Committed, definitely. There was, look, I've said this before in different conversations about characters, and the ones that seem to be the most successful are the ones that have the ability, at least when the camera's on and they can see the red light, to become the character that they're portraying. It's an art. Some people have that talent. Others have a little bit of it. Some people have none of it. With Warrior, he not only lived that character whenever he saw a red light, he lived that character 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He became the Warrior. He believed he was Warrior in his mind. In casual conversations that I had with him, he often referred to himself in the third person as Warrior, and what Warrior believes and what Warrior thinks. I mean, that's how deep into that character he was. Professionally, though, when Hulk came to me, and I think it was really Hulk that came to me and said, "Hey, Warrior's available," because I wasn't paying close attention to that type of thing. I wasn't, adding top names to my roster was not something that I felt required urgent attention on my part. We had a pretty great roster at that time. But if a marketable piece of business was out there and there was a way to make it work, of course I would talk about it, consider it, I guess would be the best way. So when Hulk came to me and said, "Hey, Warrior's available. I think we can draw some money together. He's a bit of a head case. We've got history, blah, 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 blah." But I heard the same thing with Randy Savage, as you pointed out. I heard the same thing with Roddy Piper. Hulk and Roddy ended up being incredibly close friends towards the end of Roddy's life in particular. Right after Roddy died, Hulk called me and he was kind of busted up, and he said, "Brother, you just got to listen to this. This is the last message that Roddy left me." And I got tears in my eyes because it was such a heartfelt message, from Roddy to Hulk. And Roddy talked a little bit about their history and how far they'd come as friends, and talked about their kids, someday maybe being in the business together and things like that, things of that nature. So it was a very hard, and that was before Roddy passed. Obviously, he didn't know he was going to pass when he left that message. So while Roddy and Hulk, I know, became very, very close toward the end of Roddy's life, as previously seen in WWF, that wasn't the case.
Right.
Roddy was extremely competitive, and look, the business was a shark infested, eat what you kill, trust no one kind of a business. It just was the way it was. Everybody was fighting for that top position. It was the nature of the way the industry was structured at that time. And because of that, there was a lot of heat and a lot of conflict between Roddy and WWF, or between Roddy and Hulk when they were both in the WWF. But they got through it and ultimately became pretty good friends. I think the same kind of feeling existed with Warrior, between Hulk and Warrior at the time in '98. Hulk was like, "Look, the guy's a head case. He's tough to manage. He's creatively hard to handle. But I think there's money there." And, you can say what you want about Hulk's instincts and decision-making processes, but keep in mind, when we signed Hulk Hogan in 1994, everybody in the wrestling media had written him off as dead.
Yep.
His character was dead. He's never going to come back. It's never going to work. WCW is grasping at straws. This is never going to work. Well, guess what? It worked in a big way. Same thing could be said for Randy Savage when we brought Randy in. Oh, he's a leftover. He's too old. If you remember, everything was about youth, right? Get the younger guys over. And Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan were being written off as way past their prime. Shouldn't be in the ring anymore. It's the Geritol Wrestling League, that type of thing. Well, guess what? It worked. So given the success that we had with those characters that came from WWF into WCW by 1998, we had kind of proven that we could get this talent over in a bigger way than WWF was able to get them over at that point in their careers. So it wasn't unreasonable to take a shot at Warrior based on the success that we'd had with Roddy, with Randy, and obviously with Hulk Hogan.
Talk to me a little bit about, I hate we're spending so much time on that meeting, but I'm just fascinated by this because we've heard the stories of, when Warrior came back to the WWF in 96, we've heard from Jim Ross and we've heard from Bruce Pritchard how that meeting went. And it sounds like a lot different than your meeting with Jim here in Phoenix. Chat me up. When he's going down the path of, here's what I have in mind for my character, and he's really laying it on thick with the preteen market, and that's who his fan base is. And that's what he envisions for his character. Are you sort of just, I don't mean for this to be dismissive, but are you sort of just yeah-yeahing him? Because that's not who your audience is, and you need to get him on board, and then we'll figure out, he knows the Hogan thing's going to happen, but creatively, maybe none of that will actually work. But if we can just sort of get him in the boat, we'll figure it out when we get there.
Well, I mean, I was overwhelmed listening to him. And when I say, we had a meeting where I spent 3 hours listening, I'm not kidding. I did very little talking. And can you imagine that? Me doing very little talking?
No.
So I was really on the receiving end of his passion. I mean, it was pure passion, misguided in some cases as it might be. I mean, he wasn't ever going to make a Warrior movie, but you couldn't tell Warrior that. I doubted that there would be a Warrior animated, cartoon product on the Cartoon Network, but that's what Warrior was. I keep calling him Jim. That's what Warrior was excited about. I think one of the reasons that Warrior might have been really excited about the prospect of coming to WCW went way beyond what was obvious as far as him and Hogan in the storyline there. I think Jim was looking at Turner Broadcasting much the way he should have looked at it, as a bigger, broader opportunity. And he did. He saw movies, he saw cartoons on the Cartoon Network, he saw all of these things. And again, I just listened. And, as far as my feelings or my impressions, better way to say it, I was overwhelmed, but I really was impressed with Warrior's passion. Misguided, as I said, it may have been in some cases, maybe unrealistic would be a better way of saying it. I couldn't help, though, be impressed with his enthusiasm and his passion. I mean, he was just boiling over. He didn't drink. He obviously he didn't smoke. When I say obviously, I mean, I assumed he never did, but he seemed to be, someone who was very tuned into his health and wellness. And, despite the abuse he obviously put himself through early on, but there was no alcohol involved. It was just a long dinner where I sat and listened, and I walked away going, wow, this guy's, he's out there, but damn, I'd rather have one or two of him and be able to get cut loose 10 guys who really didn't care, who were only there for a paycheck. I've said this before, Conrad. I remind my kids of this all the time. You can slow down a fast horse. You can work with a really, really fast horse that loves to run, and it's got a lot of attitude and personality. You can slow that horse down, but you can't speed up a slow horse. If that horse is slow, it's going to be slow till the day it dies. There's nothing you're going to be able to do to turn a slow horse into a fast horse. But you give me somebody that's overpowered, that's got way more horsepower than they probably should have, whether that's creatively, physically, energy-wise, whatever. Give me that person and let me try to control that and slow that down and manage that, as opposed to finding somebody that's just there for the paycheck, who's not really passionate, who doesn't really have any vision moving forward, who isn't willing to try something new and different, who doesn't see themselves as bigger tomorrow than they are today. I much prefer somebody that's half crazy with too much horsepower, because I can work with that.
It really is remarkable when you think about what this story is going to become. And, the rumor and innuendo would start to flare up. Gosh, the very next month after Warrior's lawsuit is done with WWE, it even goes so far as to make a hotline mention from Mark Madden. And Meltzer's going to freestyle in his report that this is probably just going to be a short-term shot in the arm ratings wise, because Warrior never really sticks around anywhere very long, but that might be enough to get people to come see him the first time around the country and maybe pop a few big numbers on TV. But my question is, and I've always been fascinated by this, did you pivot, or in your mind think you needed to pivot from Sting? I mean, we've sort of talked about very famously on this show, oh, Sting wasn't tan enough. And you and I yelled at each other about Starrcade 97. Well, fast forward just a couple of months. And if you really didn't think Sting was in the right frame of mind or the right place in his life to be the flag bearer and the top babyface for the company, did you think, hey, maybe I can recreate what happened before with Hogan Warrior? And that's when the pivot happens? Or what's the thinking here in early 98 when you're beating Vince, that you're still in the middle of your 83-week streak. You just got his top heel, Bret Hart. The NWO's still on fire. Sting just helped you set a monster pay-per-view buy rate at Starrcade. It feels like you've got a lot of momentum, but you're still interested in Warrior. Carry me through the thinking.
It was really more of an experiment. The contractual relationship that we had established with Warrior was such that we both had outs. This was not a long-term, multi-year. It was a big contract. I mean, Warrior was able to command a marketable price based on previous quotes, if you will, as they would say in the entertainment business. So he was a big contract, but he was a temporary contract in the sense that if it worked out for him and he enjoyed it, great. We could mutually agree to continue. If it wasn't working out from our perspective, then we could mutually agree not to continue. So there was, it wasn't like it was this massive commitment that required that we rethink all of the stories and angles with all of our top heels. It was an experiment. It was one that I was not thrilled about because I didn't see a character like Warrior being able to move the needle consistently. But given the nature of the relationship and the fact that it was something that Hulk was really excited about it, and we've talked about this before, guys like Hulk and Randy Savage and Roddy and even to a degree Ric Flair, guys will go back, myself included, and Vince McMahon included, I'm sure. And at some point, we'll see the same thing happening in AEW, where you go back to a formula. Something else that has worked for you in the past, and you modify it, you change it, you adapt it to the times or to whatever's going on storyline wise, but you kind of tend to go back to what you've had success with. I imagine the same is probably true with, professional football coaches as well, head coaches that tend to go back to plays that have worked in the past that need to be modified and changed in some way. So it was not a big deal. That's the best way I can kind of characterize it or frame it. He was available. There was backstory there between Hogan and Warrior. There was equity in Warrior. The audience knew who he was. So, there was a lot of reasons why we felt like, let's just give it a shot. If it works bigger and better than I thought it would, in my estimation, wonderful. If it just works out okay, that's all right too. And if it sucks, there was a way out.
Let's talk about a report from the Observer. This is from April 6th, 1998. The latest on Jim Hellwig seems to be there's a lot of seriousness to the possibility, but no deal has been reached. WCW supposedly is offering something along the lines of a low six-figure a piece for 2 pay-per-view appearances, and also wanting him to do a few nitros towards the end of the summer or the early fall. Bischoff met with Hellwig this past week in Phoenix, and there was an article in the Phoenix Republic talking about Hellwig winning the rights to the name Warrior in court, where Hellwig talked about going to work for WCW. So there's at least a newspaper article that speculates this could be a possibility. We'll talk about the money a little later. For now, is this true? Did you meet with Jim in Phoenix? And if so, what was that like?
I did meet him in Phoenix. We met at a hotel just outside of Scottsdale, beautiful hotel, and it was a nice time of year. So we sat outside, had a great lunch, and I listened for hours. I listened to Warrior and his views on wrestling, mostly his views on his character, what he felt were potential opportunities outside of the wrestling ring with his character, comic books, animation, merchandise, all the things that somebody with a really, really big vision for himself or herself would want to discuss. He, like I said earlier, he believed in this Warrior character so much. He was so immersed in it, in his real world. His fantasy world became his real world. That was all he wanted to talk about. We didn't really talk about in the first meeting. We didn't really talk about money at all. It was all about what are the opportunities for Warrior and where can this Warrior character go after we reestablish him on television and wrestling. That was probably, I would say the meeting lasted somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 to 3 hours. And I would say 2 hours and 20 minutes to 2 hours and 50 minutes of that was me looking at hundreds of pages of animation and designs and imagery and hearing what Jim wanted to accomplish.
Give me a flavor for, what he was telling you he wanted or was important to him.
Really, he wanted to extend the Warrior brand. He saw himself as a real life hero for kids, and he wanted to further, I guess, extend the Warrior character beyond what had been established in WWF. He wanted to extend that, like I said, into a world of other opportunities. He wanted to do live action animation, as well as traditional animation. He saw himself having a great impact on kids. At least that's one of the things that was consistent in almost every conversation is, ways to connect with that young audience. When I say young, I mean preteen audience. That's how he saw the Warrior character. And he saw the Warrior character as having a voice that could positively influence young kids. That's where his head was at.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.